At just 17 years old, Aela Mansmann serves as a board member for the organization Safe Bay. Safe Bay is a survivor-founded, student-led national organization whose mission is to end sexual assault among middle and high school students. Safe Bay states that, as the only national peer-to-peer organization of our kind, we help promote culture change by giving teens the tools to become activists and shift school culture through raising awareness about dating violence, sexual harassment and assault, affirmative consent, safe bystander intervention, survivor care, and their rights under Title IX. The survivors and their families that founded Safe Bay first came together during the filming of the Netflix documentary Audrey and Daisy. Audrey and Daisy is a documentary film that examines the ripple effects on families, friends, schools, and communities when two teenage girls find that sexual assault crimes against them have been caught on camera. The documentary shows the girls in the film, Audrey and Daisy, go on to face the public sharing of their assaults over social media, community backlash, and their school mishandling their ongoing harassment.
Good morning, Maryville. It's a cold start to the day right now, only 21 degrees.
Audrey was one of my only true friends.
She was always a happy kid, fun kid.
And Daisy, she was such a daddy's girl.
In a small town, everybody is connected.
A lot of these families have been here for generations.
This guy started texting me. It was kind of like, oh, older boys want to hang out with us. I think I was drunk.
The boys were pretty persistent. Then I guess things got worse.
She was laying in the yard, and her hair was frozen to the ground.
A group of boys crowded around, looking at a phone.
You carried her upstairs passed out. Why did you lie to the police?
She said, I'm scared. I did something that I didn't want to do.
Who took the video?
The whole town split up into sides, Daisy against people that were very, very vicious.
We started having issues with vandalism.
It was picked up in the world of social media. That's when this erupted into a firestorm.
The grandson of a Missouri official has walked free.
We had our house burned down.
These are very hard cases.
No nice way to say it, they're liars.
The verdict was hard to believe.
She said, I can't do this anymore.
It became more important to shield the boys than it did to find justice for the girls.
Try this trick and spin it.
Girls have as much culpability in this world as boys do.
Your head will collapse, but there's nothing.
If no one's going to talk about it, then I will.
Where is my mind?
It's sad, but after that incident, something clicked.
You can't ignore an army of voices. The words of our enemies aren't as awful as the silence of our friends.
Tragically, Audrey Pott and Daisy Coleman both went on to die by suicide. Safe Bay is a powerful organization that proves fighting for victims of assault is a matter of life and death. Safe Bay was created to help prevent what happened to the girls in the documentary from happening to anyone else. Aela Mansmann is the teenage activist who is fearless about speaking up for what she believes in, no matter who tries to stop her. In 2019, she sued her high school when they tried to suspend her for bullying when she posted sticky notes in the school bathroom that read, "There's a rapist in our school and you know who it is." In the era of Me Too and Time's Up, it wasn't long before national news programs like the New York Post, NBC News, ABC News, and Teen Vogue were picking up the story. Teen Vogue reported that many girls at Aela's high school had come forward with allegations of abuse against fellow classmates. Many students said that they felt that their school had not done enough to protect them. And so, to call attention to what was happening, Aela plastered the school bathroom with sticky notes, never outing anyone by name in the process. BuzzFeed News reported that eventually a certain male student experienced what could be described as ostracism by his peers. Upset by his experience, he remained out of school for several days. His family informed the school that they considered the entire incident to be a matter of bullying, and the school administrators ultimately decided that they agreed. The report went on to say that as a result of the sticky notes, the school launched a 3-week investigation. Eventually, Aela and 2 other students were called into a meeting with the school administrators, who informed them that they were being suspended for violating the school's anti-bullying policy. Meanwhile, the perpetrators, who were accused of the sexual violence, were not in any trouble at all. Students staged a walkout in protest over their suspension. During the walkout, students read a list of demands that they felt the school needed to make in order to aid in helping students who came forward with reports of harassment. But the school still didn't listen. Eventually, Aela's parents and the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit on her behalf, arguing that the note was First Amendment protected speech meant to call attention to sexual assault at the school and to hold the school administration accountable for keeping students safe. By September 2020, the school and Aela agreed to end the lawsuit over the sticky notes, with the school agreeing to remove any record of discipline against students who posted the note about sexual assault in the bathroom. This ended an almost year-long lawsuit. Please welcome youth activist and Safe Bay board member Aela Mansmann to the hot seat. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I am so intrigued by you, by your organization. I think it's amazing, especially being like as young as you are, to start something like this is a really big deal. And I think that a lot of people would fear to start an organization like this. So again, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to speak with you and have this platform and get to talk about what we do.
Yes, I'm going to jump right into it. In 2016, the Netflix documentary Audrey and Daisy was released on Netflix. It followed the story of 2 girls from 2 different towns who faced intense ridicule and online harassment from the people in their towns and their peers when these girls revealed that they were sexually assaulted by guys who were supposed to be their friends. The documentary discusses sexual assault, mental illness, and harassment in ways that weren't talked about before, especially by young girls, who often report that they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard in general, but especially when it comes to sexual assault and rape culture. A lot of people who watched the film even told me that it made them uncomfortable. How do you think that this documentary changed the way that assault is talked about among young people? And do you think that it shed a spotlight on harassment and vulnerability that victims face when they bring their stories to light?
Definitely. I think films in general and media play a really big part in kind of setting the tone for how we talk about certain issues. And an issue like sexual violence, and specifically sexual violence among teens, wasn't really something that was talked about before the film was released. And I think that is really where the biggest impact of Audrey and Daisy is noticeable. We went from this culture where no one really wanted to talk about kids having sex to begin with, or admitting that kids were, and when I say kids, I mean teenagers, that teenagers were sexual beings and were exploring their sexuality. And then the film was released, and we were able to see the injustices that in the film young women face when it comes to reporting their abuse, and all the issues that come up with the justice system, and trying to receive justice as a survivor. But then specifically something that Safe Bay talks a lot about, and what we did a campaign on, that really hones in on the idea that the online, specifically online harassment, but also in-person harassment that survivors face after reporting an assault. Daisy often talks about how it was like it was her versus her perpetrator, and she felt very alone. And I think that is a story that we hear time and time again from survivors from all walks of life. And I think we're at this tipping point right now where people believe survivors and culture is changing. And slowly there's beginning to be more support, and young people know how to respond when someone discloses their story to them. And they know that, bullying and harassment is never okay.
In more recent teen television and film, we have seen a spike in darker subject matter, such as drugs, mental health, assault, and toxic masculinity. As a young person yourself, because I often feel like when I hear these shows talked about, I feel like it's from an adult perspective. So as a young person yourself, do you think that these topic matters that are being discussed in shows like Euphoria, 13 Reasons Why, in films like Moxie, which are meant to be seen as real and things that teens go through today, do you feel that these things are being portrayed as real reflections of Generation Z? And are these things major concerns that youth are openly talking about today?
I think that's definitely a multi-layered question. So Euphoria, 13 Reasons Why, and Moxie I've seen all three of them, and they were all completely different.
Yeah.
I would say Moxie is probably the most realistic of the three. Speaking from personal experience, I can say that it is very realistic. I think, okay. I think how realistic Euphoria is a very hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And from the drug perspective, I can't speak to that. I can't say that I experience the problems that Rue experiences in the show. So I can't speak to how realistic that portrayal of drug addiction is. But the portrayal of the toxic relationship between Maddie and Nate, I would say that's pretty real. I would say that portrayal really shows the intensity of a toxic relationship and the loyalty between the two characters, and how even though Nate did strangle Maddie, how she denied it. I think that storyline is a really important piece to the work that we do. Now, I was just talking about this with a friend of mine, and how, while it's really important for these stories to be told, and for a show like 13 Reasons Why, I think that was really the first time that these heavy, heavy issues were shown in a TV format, in a feature format. It's the first time I remember watching that. And I think it's really important for that story to be told. But with that comes a huge responsibility. And oftentimes I think filmmakers miss the mark when they decide to include very heavy content matter and then leave out curriculum or education or campaigns or a partnership with an organization that addresses the problems and continues the conversation. And I think 13 Reasons Why definitely face the consequences of that, and I think is a major example and shows just how deep those responsibilities run when it comes to 13 Reasons Why it came out, and then soon after came studies of suicide rates spiking.
Yeah.
And there you see a direct cause and effect. So I think when it comes to discussing heavy content matter, whether it be drug use, suicide, sexual assault, whatever it is, comes a huge responsibility to have a real honest, raw conversation from an educational and prevention lens.
That's really well said, and I completely agree. Books geared towards teenagers as well should have that educational component to it.
Yeah.
Now, I've been following the Safe Bay Foundation for a while now, and Safe Bay's mission is to end sexual assault among middle school and high school students by giving teens the tools to become activists and shift school culture through raising awareness about dating violence, sexual harassment and assault, affirmative consent, safe bystander intervention, and survivor care. I think that it's an amazing foundation for everyone to learn about, especially young people. Can you tell me a little bit more about how Safe Bay started, why it started, and talk about the different types of things that Safe Bay has done?
Sure, yeah. So Safe Bay was founded off the backs of the film Audrey and Daisy. The subjects of the film are the co-founders of the organization, as well as Shale Norris, our founding executive director. And they all came to this space with very different experiences and perspectives. We had Daisy and Ella and Jada, all survivors. There was Charlie, Daisy's brother, who really experienced, how sexual assault impacts family members and how it can indirectly impact people. And then you had Shale, who had been working in this space for a very long time with a lot of experience in nonprofit work on college campuses. And then with the film coming out, she was able to anticipate the turning point. She had seen the turning point on college campuses around the topic of sexual assault and harassment, and she was able to anticipate that turning point trickling down to middle schools and high schools as well. So after the film was released, Safe Bay started with an educational video series that kind of went hand in hand with the film. So the subjects toured and had educational screenings where people in communities got to watch the film, ask the subjects of the film questions, and then watch a few short videos created by Safe Bay to really enhance the education piece, along with the storytelling that the film did.
To me, something that really stood out about Safe Bay was the bystander intervention. What do you say to people who witness something or become bystanders to an incident but feel too afraid to speak up and out? Because that's something I saw all the time in high school and in college.
Yeah. I mean, bystander intervention is something that we really talk a lot about. We talk about how to safely intervene, and how sometimes there isn't a safe way to intervene. And then at that point, what are your options then? One of our PSAs is called Game On, and it talks all about, it's set at this high school party after a football game and everyone's drinking. And there are some situations that the designated driver, this girl, witnesses. She sees her friends in these situations, and we get to see her intervene in all these different ways. And oftentimes in movies or in TV shows or books, intervention looks like some macho display of strength. There's, people punching each other, and that's how you intervene with violence or just some explosive outburst. And I think that definitely can work. Yeah. But that's not accessible for a lot of people. Intervening in a situation where you're not sure exactly what's going on, but you have this gut feeling that you don't think what's going on is necessarily okay, but you just want to check in, then what do you do? Mm-hmm. And our goal was to talk about bystander intervention in a way that makes it so it doesn't sound scary or intimidating to anyone. And so the PSA shows this one example of this. The designated driver sees her friend who's a little drunk, and this guy is like trying to get her to hook up. And the designated driver grabs a tampon and goes over to her friend and is like, "Hey, you needed this, right?" And the friend's like, Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And that's a really easy, accessible, kind of funny way to
Yeah.
come in. And I mean, thinking, if I were to ever do that to a friend and the next day looking back and being like, I would think that's kind of hilarious the way, like, that's a really accessible way to break up a situation without it really becoming a massive situation. So I think our main goal when it comes to talking about bystander intervention is how to do it in an easy, accessible, non-intimidating way.
Do you think that young people are more receptive to being an activist when it comes to sexual assault awareness and dismantling rape culture as opposed to older generations who I feel sometimes have a bit of a pushback and a lot of times often engage in kind of that culture?
I think yes and no. With social media, we're kind of inundated with or with like this concentrated feed that's curated to us.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if we all know if you like certain posts, your feed algorithm changes and blah blah blah. So I think there are a lot more activists. I think, the generation before me or like my parents' generation, I don't think there were a lot of sexual assault prevention clubs going on in school then. I I'd be surprised if there were any, especially in a middle school or high school level.
Yeah.
I think because of social media, storytelling and sharing your story is a lot more accessible. And that story can be shared and viewed with the top of your finger.
Yeah.
And so I think at that point, it's become a lot more clear how an issue like sexual assault and harassment affects everyone, either directly or indirectly. And so at that point, it's kind of this space where, everyone can kind of come together on a solution. We can all agree that sexual violence is bad. There's no negotiating that. And we can all agree that this is an issue that is as prevalent as it is because there's no denying that fact anymore. And so yeah, I mean, I think with all of that said, there are a lot more young people stepping up to the table and saying, this is an issue that affects me, or this is an issue that affects my friend. I want to get involved. And ultimately, the solution is very easy. It's education. That's something everyone can get involved in.
Audrey Pott and Daisy Coleman were incredibly brave, creative, and beautiful young girls who tragically took their own lives. How can people better help survivors of sexual assault?
I would say the first thing is knowing how to respond to someone that discloses to you. Listening, believing, supporting the best you can. Those are really key parts in helping a survivor move forward in their healing process. If someone doesn't believe a survivor, like the first person a survivor discloses to, their response can very easily make or break their healing process. There's a level of, I guess there's a major responsibility to just know how to respond, but ultimately responding isn't that hard. Obviously it's hard to listen to a friend of yours if they're disclosing a traumatic experience that they've gone through. That is tremendously difficult. But responding is just listening and saying, I believe you, I support you, I'm here for you. I would say we've come to a point, especially internally at Safe Bay, after Daisy passed. I know for me, I knew the damage that sexual violence can do. But it was kind of this like secondhand knowledge where now I've come to realize that this is a life or death issue. And at this point, I think, I mean, it's a life or death issue and everyone can get involved and it's all about talking and conversations and communication. That's all. First of all, that's all consent is. And that's all education and prevention is talking, communicating, learning from one another. That's the basis of all of our work and our education model. So it's incredibly easy, accessible. All of our materials are free. And at this point, it's just time to talk to one another. And I mean, I'm very fortunate that my friends and family are incredibly supportive and willing to listen to me talk about the work that I do and the educational campaigns that I'm thinking of and all that stuff. But I think we're really coming to a point where the general consensus is that this is an issue we can all support and get involved with and learn from. And once culture change happens, I mean, that's policy change is, of course, incredibly important, but culture change is where the real work lies, not the real work, that's the wrong term, but culture change is where I think you'll start to see the shift happen. And we're there.
I think that was really powerful what you said. This is life or death. And that's what makes the organization even more necessary and important. So thank you.
Yeah.
Now, there were other girls in this documentary who bravely shared their stories, which is hard to do. Do you think that speaking out about these things can empower other survivors to speak out as well?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Me Too movement,
yeah,
I think everything picks up, and I think there's a huge amount of power that can come from sharing your story and being believed and supported.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there's a lot of healing that in a lot of ways can be very therapeutic.
Yeah.
It feels risky because we have this long history of people not believing survivors.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if we can get away from that and just say we believe, if there can be the general consensus in culture that we believe survivors, it can be a very therapeutic process.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that the topic around consent, something that seems seemingly obvious, has become so confusing to both younger and older people, especially when the conversation includes alcohol?
I mean, I don't think I can really speak to the older generation. I think the only thing there is that ultimately this isn't an issue that was talked about and wasn't really even considered an issue when their generation was growing up. And so I think everyone is ultimately a product of the environment they've grown up in.
Yeah.
But for young people, I think that question is really difficult because the question then becomes how much alcohol is too much alcohol to be considered unable to consent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where people tend to think that the waters are muddied.
Yeah.
Right. Am I right with that? Would you say?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think for teenagers who aren't actually legal adults and old enough to actually drink, I guess the answer is like no alcohol.
Right.
Is the right amount of alcohol, technically speaking. But if we're going to all accept that young people here and there are experimenting with alcohol, I think what we always say is that if they're not sober enough to drive, they're not sober enough to consent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really it.
Yeah, no, that's a great statement that needs to be heard way more, even among older people who legally can drink.
Yeah.
What are some ways that schools can reform their policies, and what can schools do to better protect students when it comes to assault and rape culture? Yeah,
so I mean, there's a few things that I always say. First being a proper consent education curriculum, super, super important. Education right at its core, addressing the problem and preventing it right at the start, starting that consent curriculum at a much younger age, to the point where, you know, consent is not inherently about sex, but sex is inherently about consent. So you can talk about consent before you're ever talking about sex. And that's something that needs to start way earlier. So I guess that would be the first thing. And then trauma-informed staff trainings for school personnel and anyone working with kids needs to know how to properly respond to a student disclosing a report to them, and how to respond in a trauma-informed way. Because, you know, the teachers that do know that they're mandated reporters, they can respond and report, but it's not always, it's difficult because what I've experienced is that oftentimes teachers don't necessarily know that they're mandated reporters, or they do know, but they're not sure who to report to or how to report, or or the details, or what to directly say to that student that's just disclosed to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having that training, I think, would be incredibly helpful to teachers and students. And then the last thing is like on the policy reform level, having a comprehensive response, like sexual assault response policy. So they have received a report of sexual assault, what are the systems in which and how they conduct a Title IX investigation. Okay, so the perpetrator has been found in violation of these things as per the investigation they conducted. What's their punishment? And having a very cut and dried, this is what you did, this is your punishment. And obviously you can't list every possible thing that could ever be done and what every possible punishment.
Right.
But just having the bases there and then breaking it down to a case by case basis. But ultimately, then survivors know this is what's done to me. Even though the school, because of HIPAA, can't directly tell them what their perpetrator's punishment is, they can know this is what was done with me. This is roughly how they will be punished and how I will be protected.
My last question for you is, how did the name Safe Bay come to be, and what is Bay Code?
So Bay Code kind of goes back to the bystander intervention piece of things. It's just committing to being someone that will intervene and just a general advocate for this issue. But BAY stands for Before Anyone Else. It was an acronym that was used pretty frequently when we were founded. But ultimately, our work is all about preventing sexual assault before anyone else. So we did this campaign about this time last year called Bringing Back BAY, because we've been around for 6 years now, but 5 years last year. And after 5 years, BAY wasn't really an acronym that was being used all that much anymore. And even if it was, they didn't necessarily know what each letter stood for. So we wanted to reclaim the word and really bring us back to our roots. Why do we educate young people? Well, it's because we want to do this work before anything happens to anyone else. That messaging was something that was really important to Daisy. She was all about educating young people, preventing sexual assault before anyone else.
This has been an incredible interview. I think that you're an amazing young lady. I've read up on you. I Googled you. I know what you've done. I know you sued the school. I thought that was incredible. You're someone I wish that I could have been when I was 17. And I think honestly that a lot of people can say that.
You're so sweet.